At Anime Expo 2017, it was announced at the Trigger panel that the studio was working on an upcoming series to be titled SSSS Gridman, and that the show would be the studio's own anime take on the tokusatsu series. It was also claimed that it would come replete with an original story unrelated to its live-action predecessor, the 1993 series Denko Chojin Gridman, and would be directed by one of the studio's biggest names, Akira Amiyama. A year later, in the fall of 2018, the world was introduced to SSSS Gridman. The series follows a Music protagonist, Yuta Hibiki, a teen who has acquired the ability to merge with a mysterious super agent known as Gridman. Together with the aid of his friends, they form a group known as the Gridman Alliance, a motley crew of would-be heroes who have banded together to prevent the destruction of the city of Tsutsujidai at the hands of the capricious demiurge, Akane Shinju, and the kaiju she creates each week with the help of the mysterious Alexis Kerub. There it is, SSSS Gridman. In this video, I'd like to put the first episode of the series under the lens and examine some of the elements of the production and directorial techniques that made this episode, and by extension this series as a whole, such an interesting experience. I will try and avoid any series-altering spoilers, but there will be some light ones when necessary, so be warned if you haven't seen this series already and plan on watching it in the future. I'd also like this to be the first in a series of episode breakdowns, so if you have any suggestions for other anime titles with episode recommendations, please let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, please leave a like and consider hitting that notification button and subscribing if you enjoyed the video. One final word of caution before we begin, this video is not an Easter egg hunt. I'm aware that the series is so tightly packed with references, hat tips and homages to the original IP, as well as a smorgasbord of other IPs that it's fit to burst, but that won't be the focus of today's video. This video will focus on the influences and techniques that helped shape this episode. So without further ado, let's access it. 'The opening minute of the episode stylistically is about as antithetical to a tokusatsu genre piece as one would ever hope to encounter. Off the bat, we are confronted with about half a dozen lingering establishing shots, which are evocative of the directorial stylings of Neon Genesis Evangelion director Hideaki Anno. And as we go further into this episode and the series itself, it's glaringly apparent that Ava's influence runs strong throughout. Through these languid, lingering shots of a school suffocating in the dead heat of summer, Amiyama does an exceptional job of evoking the deeply sensorial nature of Anno's magnum opus. The purpose of this opening is to establish tone and to create a sense of immersiveness with the world which we are being presented with. And one of the key ways that this is achieved is through the use of diegetic sound. Diegetic sound is sound that originates naturally from within the world being presented on the screen. And the opening sequence, and in fact most of the episode itself sonically, is entirely diegetic. This is an extremely efficient way of enhancing what is known as spatial immersion, or the sense that what we are witnessing is perceptually convincing to us as a viewer, and is used to great effect by both Amiyama in these shots and by Anno in the opening moments of Ava. Beyond the sound design, however, perhaps the most noteworthy element of this opening sequence and the episode itself is the animation. Like the sound, its purpose is immersive. If we look at this shot of these scattered shoes here at the 14-second mark, or these garbage cans at the 9 minute 24 seconds mark, there is a real richness to the depth of the animation, and that's because the production team placed such a heavy degree of emphasis on the world itself, in order to sustain the illusion that the characters and the objects around them inhabit the same space, by making it feel at once both tactile and lived in. The production team went to great lengths to achieve this, so much so in fact that the animation team and Amiyama himself hand drew an unusually high percentage of the static objects rather than have them handled by the background art department. The overall effect is very impressive, and by foregrounding the more immersive and understated elements in both the sound design and animation, it strongly portends to an episode which later on would make some very interesting and surprisingly bold directorial decisions creatively. Moving beyond the opening sequence to another of SSSS Gridman's more noteworthy elements, if more low-key when contrasted against the incredibly bombastic kaiju battle sequences, is the series' masterful use of transitions. Let's jump forward to the 9:15 mark. Here we get 6 pretty interesting cutaways or establishing shots as we transition between scenes at the high school. Thematically and tonally, they're almost identical to the episode's opening shots, as they really accentuate the mundane uber-realism of just another day at school. Generally, establishing shots are used to builds the context for the coming scene by showing the relationship between the figures and objects that occupy the space of the shot. They are most often long to extreme long shots, long here indicating width, not time, at the beginning of a scene, and serve as a visual signpost to indicate where and when the remainder of the scene will occur. Take for example this beautiful cut here at the 6 minute and 10 second mark. We get an extremely wide angle shot at range, showing the panorama of a bridge in summer. This gives us a clear understanding of the space and time of the scene while simultaneously establishing both tone and mood. The serene waters of the gently flowing river, those familiar diegetic sounds of summer introduced to us at the beginning of the episode return, and the stately pace of an elderly man strolling across the bridge all serve to create a sense of pleasant normalcy to what is tonally a pretty uplifting scene. The imagery used is pretty cool here also, and scriptwriter Keiichi Hasegawa deserves some praise at this juncture. In this scene we have the river representing division. It's the division of Yuta's past life, which is currently lost to him, and his present state of extreme memory loss. The bridge the boys are crossing symbolizes mutual understanding and connection, physically embodying Utsumi and Yuta's friendship. This friendship is the promise of a return for Yuta as he seeks to reconnect with the life that's been taken from him by amnesia. As the boys cross the water, the sense of optimism increases as Utsumi reveals truths to Yuta about their relationship and about himself, reassuring him, "You're not a bad guy." The scene ends with the corners of Yuta's mouth curled softly in a slight smile. As I said, it's pretty uplifting and overall just a beautiful synergy of script and direction. Bridges are a visual recurring motif in the series as a whole, as we see them at several key points throughout the series, maybe none more so profoundly than here at the 608 mark of episode 11, as we see Akane, now a shell of her former self in the aftermath of her desperate actions in episode 10, sitting overlooking the waters of Sutsujidai, the city she has left in ruins. In the background, we see the bridge broken and seemingly irreparable, as all hope for any chance of connection with her adversaries is now seemingly lost. As we go back to the bridge in episode 1 again, that feeling of optimism established in this scene is a fleeting one, however, as we then cut to the front of the school and the mood shifts dramatically, taking on a much more ominous feeling, as Amiyama juxtaposes the pleasant bonding of two high school friends on a walk to school with the ominous reality of the situation Yuta has found himself mixed up in. The camera's gaze lifts and we are confronted with a colossal, spectral kaiju looming hauntingly over the school. I love that transition at the 6:10 mark, and the transition at the 9:15 mark is equally as remarkable, if for differing reasons. Stylistically, these shots bear little resemblance to that of the previously examined one on the bridge. They feel more random, more mysterious, less obviously purposeful, and yet somehow equally as profound. These shots are examples of what are known as pillow shots. A pillow shot is a cutaway for no apparent reason in a narrative sense to a visual element, a landscape, an empty room, or a random object such as a vase. These shots are held for quite a significant time, usually lasting 5 to 6 seconds, sometimes longer, and can be at the start of or during a scene. Pillow shots are a hallmark of Eva. They are ever present within the series itself, and it is a pretty safe assumption that the quote-unquote Eva influence was primarily what Amiyama was tapping into through his own use of the technique. So much so, in fact, that the first shot in the sequence at the 9:15 to 9:18 mark is literally an exact recreation of one of the most famous reoccurring cuts in Eva itself, the top-down shot of the class number hanging outside of the classroom. However, pillow shots are not unique to Eva. They appear in abundance in anime throughout the 80s, 90s and beyond, and are wonderfully employed as a technique on many occasions in Isao Takahata's 1988 masterpiece Grave of the Fireflies, and have become something of a calling card in the work of Makoto Shinkai much more recently. However, the name most synonymous with the pillow shot is not an anime director, it is film director Yasujiro Ozu. Ozu is historically one of the most significant directors in Japanese cinema and is widely recognized as the master of the pillow shot. His most famous use of the technique is this cutaway to a vase in the 1949 film Late Spring. And while I'd contend that Anno was the primary motivating force for Amiyama's use of the technique in SSSS Gridman, Ozu is where it all began. The pillow shot is interesting because, unlike the establishing shot, it doesn't appear to establish anything. It interrupts the narrative, and as a result, pillow shots stand in a unique space at a border between narrative and non-narrative storytelling. These shots of the school at the 9:15 mark, or this coffee cup here at the 3:50 mark, they don't further the story, the plot, or advance character motivations in any true sense, and yet there they are on the screen. Even on the most superficial level, pillow shots can be understood as slowing down the tempo of the narrative by injecting a sense of serenity into what we are watching and giving the audience a chance to breathe and contemplate the significance of the events which are unfolding before us. In Gridman's case, they also help to intensify that uncanny sense of the everyday that Amiyama is amplifying in this episode. But beyond just setting tone or establishing mood, pillow shots can mean quite a bit more. In SSSS Gridman, these shots help to highlight the emotional significance of the events in the series. They act as visual signifiers for the psychological state of the characters, specifically Akane. These shots are subtle signposts which help evoke the deep emotion rolling below the surface of the story itself. As an example, let's contrast the reoccurring cut here at the 9:15 mark of episode 1 and this cut here at the 5:07 mark of episode 11. It's essentially the same shot, but the lighting is drastically different in both. In the first cut from episode 1, the sun's light comes streaming in from the window on the right of the screen and from what appears to be a doorway at the end of the corridor. The light lends a warmness tonally to the image, and the shots that follow in this sequence are all bathed in that natural light. Overall, the shots exude a sense of comfortable ease and stability emotionally, as all appears to be right in this world. Now, when we contrast that to the much more somber cut we see in episode 11, the tone has drastically altered. Here, the sun's rays are noticeably absent, and the shot feels much more oppressive. The tone isn't necessarily darker, rather it feels emotionally devoid or deadened by the greyness which seems to bleed into the shot from the exterior, with the reveal in episode 6 of Akane's connection to the city being something much more profound than initially understood. These contrasting shots, when examined next to each other, offer up a pretty powerful overview of the emotional trajectory of Akane's character throughout the series. And by episode 11, as she approaches her emotional nadir and collapses into hollowness, the pillow shots which Amiyama employs mirror this descent artfully. Another very impressive feature of this episode is the focus on power lines and how they're used to frame the kaiju looming over the city itself. Check out this stunning shot here of Rika at the 422 mark, the shot of a kaiju here at 447, and finally this shot at the 10-minute mark of episode 2. These shots carry a great deal of significance with them. Shots of power lines were another calling card of Hideaki Anno and were employed in a similar manner in Eva. For example, check out this amazing shot here at the 1 hour 11 minutes and 10-second mark of the second Eva movie, You Cannot Advance, and how the power lines form a sort of guard of honor for the rampaging Eva Unit 3. Beyond Eva, power line shots are found within many anime, especially in the 90s. Shots of power lines were almost omnipresent in another 90s cult classic, Serial Experiments Lane, and cuts of power lines were used much earlier by the aforementioned Yasujiro Ozu in many of his features. Here we see pillow shots of power lines in this 1932 feature I Was Born But, and again later in his 1962 film An Autumn Afternoon. Given their unique status in anime as a whole, power lines in SSSS Gridman operate on a number of levels simultaneously. Firstly, they are visually evocative and help accentuate the sense of nostalgia the series is tapping into. Secondly, just like in Anno and Ozu's work, they help contribute to the atmosphere of the series itself. Power lines act as signifiers of the mundane, the everyday, and when they are used as framing devices for the kaiju or the more otherworldly elements of the series, the power lines help to create a real sense of menace through contrast. As the kaiju looms ominously over the city, their gargantuan physical presence and otherworldliness are magnified intensely when contrasted against an everyday object like power lines or the school. As a final example, check out this beautiful shot here from the 3-minute and 13-second mark of episode 11, and how the power lines appear to be getting crushed under the weight of the digital space ominously looming in the background as the world begins to crumble in the wake of the devastation of episode 10. The final element of this episode I would like to examine is this scene here at the 10-minute and 32-second mark.
スペシャルドッグ余ってるからあげる。
ありがとう。
いえいえ。やばい。
連絡します。乾先生1番にお電話が入っております。乾先生1番にお電話が入っております。至急職員室までお越しください。
This moment is, in many respects, the most memorable scene in the whole episode itself, and in fact one of the most memorable scenes in the series as a whole. It's hard not to draw parallels between this shot and some of the most iconic static scenes we got in Eva, such as the infamous elevator scene with the Rei and Asuka in episode 22, or the scene of Shinji holding Kaoru in the palm of Eva Unit 1's hand in episode 24. These static shots are really interesting for a variety of reasons. The effectiveness of these scenes relies on creating what is known as dead time. Dead time, by definition, is the time lag between a stimulus given to an instrument and the resulting response. The stimulus is what causes action response, and in this scene the stimulus is Tonkawa's ball. The response, however, doesn't come for a further 22 seconds. The interim period of time between the stimulus and the response is dead time. As a consequence, dead time is in essence a withholding device, which uses the power of animation and the moving image in general against itself. Animation is a medium which on a base structural level relies on the illusion of movement to exist. Most film and TV, animated or otherwise, will also rely on movement to lean toward the viewer and grab and hold our focus through a chain of action and reaction. What is being presented in this chain is what we can refer to as a dynamic process. A dynamic process is a propulsive force that is constantly progressing and driving the narrative forwards. And this is something that is deservedly lauded when successfully executed, as we see characters evolve and develop while undergoing a series of major transitions. This scene at the 10:32 mark is fascinating because it does exactly the opposite. The scene doesn't hold our attention by leaning towards us. Rather, it pulls away from us through the act of withholding and forces us to lean into it. It forces us to become active, as we as viewers are now left with the challenge of interpreting what is framed as seemingly an extremely important moment in the episode, as the dull, bassy thud of the ball striking the special dog reverberates dramatically across our eardrums, and we are confronted with the sight of the students of Class 1E frozen like sculptures on the screen. It might seem like nothing of consequence has occurred, but of course it grows increasingly dense and more pregnant the longer the shot is held. If static shots like this are employed correctly, they can pack an extremely profound punch as the image becomes increasingly more powerful as the time drags on. The viewer is now alone, abandoned by any guiding force, and left to interpret the significance of the events displayed before them, becoming captive to the scene itself. If we now go back to Eva and the iconic moment of Shinji holding Kaoru, this incredible moment of stasis is held for over a minute. As with each passing second, the deep profundity of what we are witnessing intensifies the longer the gaze is held. Unseen by the eye, we, the viewer, become struck with the realization that there is a rite of action occurring, but it is happening off screen. It's all in Shinji's head. As we are confronted with the reality of what we are witnessing, the scene is showing Shinji wrestling with the decision he is being forced into making, killing Kaoru. This is an extremely moving scene, and it occurred in episode 24 of the series, so by this point the viewer has a pretty clear grasp of Shinji as a character and can, with some degree of certitude, infer what is running through his mind as he wrestles with the decision he is being forced to make. The scene at the 10:32 mark of SSSS Gridman, however, occurs in episode 1 and doesn't provide the viewer with any such contextual luxuries. We have been dragged into this moment, but we don't know why or where to focus our attention. Up to this point in the series, we have spent almost all of our time with Yuta and have no real understanding of Akane as a character, and no true sense of why exactly this moment would be framed in the manner that it has been. Time drags ominously onwards. The tension swells as we wait in anticipation for that moment of explosive release, like we saw in Eva with the confrontation between Rei and Asuka in the elevator in episode 22, or with the literal crushing climax of episode 24. However, that moment ostensibly never arrives. The tension deflates. Tonkawa apologizes, Yuta brushes the incident off, and the scene closes with Akane smiling warmly at Yuta. The only real clue we have that something is not as it should be is the slightly confused expression on Akane's face before she notices Yuta watching her and assumes her smile. This is a pretty nice moment of misdirection here, as we are led to believe that this odd moment of tension has passed without incident and is maybe nothing more than a Easter egg, a hat tip to Eva. However, unbeknownst to us, like in episode 24 of Eva, all the action once again happened off the screen, and that Akane, just like Shinji before her, had resolved to kill Tonkawa. And that's where we'll leave it for this video. There are some other cool elements in the episode that are worthy of recognition really quickly, such as the incredibly impressive direction leading up to and during the battle between the Kaiju and Gridman later on in this episode. There were some fantastic attempts to make the action feel like it was lifted straight from a tokusatsu, like this moment here at the 15-minute mark, as we can see cars and buses bouncing along the pavement rather than being crushed under the weight of the supposed impact, with buildings and pavement and other vehicles, as well as the awkward, cumbersome movements of the Kaiju mirroring that man in a suit aesthetic of the original Tokusatsu series. On top of it all, the 3D CG is outstanding and really enhances the spectacle of the action sequences. And if you haven't watched SSSS Gridman already and somehow made it through this video, I'd urge you to do so now. It's really worth the time. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry it's been so long between projects. I will be doing my best to upload much more often going forward. If you want to hear more from me, go check out my podcast. The link is in the description of this video. And remember, if you like this video and want to see more like this one, please leave a like and consider hitting that notification bell and subscribing. If there are any other episodes you'd like me attempt to break down, please leave your suggestions in the comments below and I will try my best to make it happen. Until next time, fair viewers, bye bye, love you, bye.